My next step is to cut out the medium size. So we're gonna start off with cutting right outside that line. So remember I mentioned that we wanna cut about 1/8 of an inch outside the line, not right on the line. And the one thing you want to remember when you're cutting is that you want to make sure you're using either craft scissors or regular paper scissors. If you try to cut paper with your fabric scissors, it's going to dull your blades much faster. Same thing with your cutting scissors. They're made for paper and not for fabric. So many times, not only will they get dull faster, but they also will create a very blunt cut through fabric, and it'll actually damage your hand more. Just be aware that it's really important to be taking care of your body when you're cutting, because these are repeated habits that if you are interested in a long-term career in costumes, that it becomes a repetitive motion that can easily cause carpal tunnel or just cause a lot of damage to your hands. So keep exercising and kind of moving and flexing those muscles in between cuts. And also one of the other reasons why it's so important to get really the right scissors and the right tools for the right job. So I've cut out my medium for my main apron. I'm gonna do the same thing with my pocket. You can see here, if you look up close, I've cut right outside of that line. One of the things that you're gonna need in order to start this, first of all, is your pin cushion, or if you have a magnetic pin cushion at home, that works great. That's gonna be really important for making sure you're securing your pattern pieces down to your fabric. The other thing you're gonna need eventually when you cut out is gonna be that good pair of fabric shears. So you can kind of see there's a big difference between this and my paper scissors. So obviously these blades are made to cut paper, something much thinner than the denim that I'm using here. I've actually given you guys paper patterns that already have the measurements or the seam allowance built in. The only thing we have to do is lay these out, and then you're just cutting around the pattern piece. You have your main apron piece laid on the fold, our facing piece also laid against the fold, your pocket, and your neck strap. First thing you want to do is make sure that your fabric is folded in the right direction. Oftentimes when you get things from Joann, which are cut right off the bolt, they're already folded. It's really important to make sure you know how to fold the fabric the right way before you start laying these out. The selvage edges need to be meeting each other. So when I say selvage edge, that just means it's the factory or ribbon edge of the fabric. And that's gonna be the most sturdy part of the fabric. In most cases, you'll see little punched needle holes all the way down the end. It's also gonna be the place that frays the least. So in my case, because I got a fabric that was just a piece of scrap and that didn't come to me from a bolt, you're not seeing it fraying, it kind of stays in place. Versus the cut edge, there's a lot of fraying already happening here. The thread is already coming apart pretty easily. I can rip it out. You know, it's pretty removable. So that's how you know which edge is the selvage edge and which edge is the less tightly woven edge. So I folded my selvage edges so that they're meeting each other. And that just means that the opposite edge is folded. We're gonna start trying to make sure we lay this out as efficiently as possible. The costume industry is all about making sure we don't waste. I'll just try and make sure I can fit the largest piece onto the fabric before I start pinning anything down. And then I'll lay my smaller pieces kind of around that. I have 3 pretty small pieces. It looks like this is gonna be plenty of room. I'm gonna have a lot of extra fabric. One thing that I do have to remember is that 2 of these pieces do require me to place one edge on the fold. Now this is where my pins will come in handy. Because this will keep my pattern piece in place. It's really important to remember that when you're pinning, that you don't overpin. You will get quite a lot of puckering when you're trying to pull the paper as well as the fabric with your pins. And that will also affect the size of what you're cutting out. So the less amount of pins I have, the less intrusive it is to the accuracy of the pattern. So I've got my biggest piece on. The next piece that also needs to be on the fold is gonna be my facing piece. So of course that I don't really have a choice. I can't just put that here somewhere. I have to put that up above. It's really important to make sure that I'm laying this parallel to your selvage edge. I'm gonna try and use the edge of my pocket to line it up that way. Next step, of course, is just to cut. And before I completely remove the pins, I want to make sure that I'm keeping the notches marked so that once I take this paper pattern off, that I still know where that notch is on the fabric. So the way that I do that is I actually cut a little, just a little snip right into the paper pattern. You can kind of see I've just cut a little slit there. So that's with my paper scissors, right? On the same thing with the fabric is I'm gonna cut through that same slit, because remember, I don't wanna cut through paper on my fabric scissors. So that's why I cut that ahead of time with paper scissors first. So now I've got that little notch marked off for me in the fabric. And then I can take the pins out. I've got a full neck piece with the little notches. You can kind of see that. Notches marked on both sides, okay? And that'll line up with my neckline on the apron.